called Closing the Gap, How Careers Advice and Guidance Can Help Tackle Inequality. I'm really pleased that you have joined us today to discuss what I think is a neglected and often misunderstood topic. At the Social Market Foundation, of course, we love all of our panel events like children, but this is probably our favourite one because at this event we get to speak about our own research that we've done, and probably we'll be telling you about some of the stuff that we've been finding in our work in recent months. So I will start with some housekeeping. Thank you all for being here. Welcome to all the people watching online. If you want to tweet about this event, our hashtag is #CareersAdvice, which I think some other people might also share with us. Hopefully we'll get there. On YouTube, you can add questions in the comments, or you can tweet questions at us. For those of us in the room, if there is a fire, follow the green fire exit signs. I'll probably keep you right. But I won't detain us too longer. I think I'm keen to just dive in and get into the conversation. So I'm going to start with a contribution from Richard Smith, who is the Chief Executive of Unite Students, who have kindly sponsored us today, and another reason we are here in this room just now. So he can tell us about why he is convening us and why this is such an important topic to Unite Students.
Cheers, thank you very much, everybody, and thank you for attending today. Thank you to Ameek and Neve and the Social Market Foundation generally, obviously to Toby and to Claire for joining this event and this panel session. As Ameek said, I'm the Chief Exec of Unite Students. For those that you don't know, Unite Students is a purpose-built student accommodation provider. We provide homes to around 75,000 students across the UK. We're a publicly listed company employing around 2,000 people in 27 towns and cities, and we work in partnership with 60 universities across those towns and cities. And here in Liverpool, we've got 10 properties, around 6,000 beds. This weekend, we welcomed something like 6,000 students to start their next year at university. But as a business, we've long held the view that sort of going to university and student accommodation as part of that offering is sort of so much more than just a place to sleep. It is an integral part of the university experience. Students spend something like 60% of their time at university in accommodation rather than sort of anywhere else. And for many students, going to student accommodation, going to one of the bedrooms, the homes that we provide, it is perhaps their first taste of independence. It's a move away from home, whatever the home environment was before, to their new university home. And perhaps it's the first opportunity for them to truly be themselves as well. And as a business, we see that it's really important to support them because that move to university can be really daunting. Yes, it's exciting, and there'll be lots of excitement going on across our halls as we speak. But that transition is something that we believe that really needs to be properly supported. So we have 24/7 security. All of our frontline teams are trained in mental health and active listening. We have mental health professionals working in every one of our properties. Not that it's our responsibility to necessarily solve a problem, but very much to signpost and facilitate the students, the organisations that can help them. And also, increasingly, we're starting to think what we can do to help students be more prepared for the transition away from university. So working with organisations like Future Learn on sort of life skills programmes, and also organisations around employability opportunities for the students that live with us. And we also undertake sort of regular insights. And one of those regular insights was that we felt that the transition from home to university wasn't as well supported as it could be. So we created something that's called the Leap Skills programme. The Leap Skills is a free resource that anybody in the room can access that helps students really understand and be better prepared. Preparedness builds resilience. What it means to go to university is, and it's got some digital content. And thank you very much to Claire and Ucas for letting us this year embed the game element of Ucas on the website, which has meant that we've been able to really extend the reach of the Leap Skills programme to more students. But also we recognise that students going to university, they need to make sure they're making the right choice about, is university right for them? And I obviously provide accommodation. I need students to want to go to university, but it's not right for everybody, the university experience. I didn't go to university. I'm dyslexic. I didn't do well at school. So I went sort of, for my education through work effectively. But having the right choices and making the right choices very early, while you're at secondary school, we felt was something that was really important. Hence why we were delighted to work with the Social Market Foundation on this research into information, advice, and guidance. And the report really examines the information, advice, and guidance, so careers advice, as I would call it, that's given currently in secondary schools, but also then more broadly what is given to outside of secondary schools through to sort of adult learners. And perhaps predictably, and I won't steal the thunder of the report, but the report identifies inequality in the distribution of careers advice and guidance within schools, which the report goes on to make a number of recommendations that it should be addressed. There's a commitment to careers advice and guidance, or information advice and guidance to all children at school. Commitments around also ensuring that there is a fairer reflection of the different routes that are available. There is probably a bit of a bias towards higher education within schools. That's no reflection of teachers whatsoever, and I fully accept some of the recommendations place a further burden on teachers, and that's not something that is sustainable. Keep on asking schools and teachers to do more, but also I think there is an opportunity to embed information, advice, and guidance into sort of the lifelong learning commitments of the current government, and what that means for sort of future skills. So I'm really looking forward to this discussion, and perhaps at that point hand over to you.
So, thank you so much, Richard, for those introductory remarks. And I'd like to pass over to Neva Reagan, my colleague, who's a researcher at the Social Market Foundation with me, and will summarise some of the research that we've been doing in recent months.
Yes, so as we said, earlier this year we published a report looking at career information advice and guidance as it currently stands in schools and colleges in England, but also in the adult sphere as well. And we had quite a few interesting findings from it, and as Rich pointed out, quite a lot of them reflect sort of the inequalities in provision. So I'm going to focus on two of those main findings today, and what we think we should do to address them, although there are plenty more. So firstly, we found that there's quite like a patchiness in the provision of information, advice, and guidance, both across schools and colleges and within the schools and colleges themselves. And related to that is that often that support for vocational options is not really there. So people don't have that information a lot of the time. And in both of those cases, there seems to be a certain element of social patterning. So we've got more affluent students in more affluent schools getting much better support and help, and less affluent students then getting less support and help. And so obviously these are things that we want to address. So it's on the patchiness and on that inconsistency. It's both in the shape of guidance and in the quality that's provided. And there's great variety in what students receive. And some of the best cases students that we spoke to is very much work experience, work placements, careers talks, a whole range of stuff. And then you get someone who has maybe a 1.5 hour session to help them decide what to do post GCSE. And that's the extent of the careers guidance they received. And often it is poor students who are being left behind essentially because they're not given that guidance on where to go. And to help, I suppose, rebalance that, we would like to see basically a priority in reducing that inconsistency. And there are a few ways that this can be done. And in relation to what Richard said on the burden on teachers, it's not fair to keep burdening stuff. So we would like to see an expansion of the Careers and Enterprise Company career hubs, because we've seen how successful they are in helping schools achieve their gap and benchmarks, building that network between local businesses so that schools can reach out for those work experience opportunities. But we'd also like to see the remit of the CEC expanded to focus on leveling those inequalities, and that being a main thing that they tackle them. And essentially not to make everyone the same, because one of the benefits of the career system at the moment is that schools can shape it to a way that suits them and suits their own working. But to level the playing field so that the facilities that schools have and the opportunities that students have are equal and are more equitable, so that you are not just stuck behind with a 1.5 hour session when you're 15 just because you live and go to school in a poor area. And then secondly, looking at vocational options to receive less support, it's sort of a twofold issue. So we had like a lack of exposure in some cases where students are generally not told that there are vocational options. We did have some students who said that they didn't think that there was another option except university until they got to sixth form. And at that stage, they had their whole mind and life and plan set. So they were never told that was something they could do. And secondly, there's quite poor information and support for those that want to pursue it. Again, because of the social patterning, in some schools, there's an expectation that you will go to university. So we won't provide you with any information on these. Teachers often being the ones having to provide it because there is that patchiness in provision, means that those students then don't know where to look for that support. And we did see it a little bit in reverse, where some students in less affluent areas were more pushed towards apprenticeships and other vocational routes, but much less so. It's very much more so a focus on university, a focus on Ucas applications. And so there are two things that we would like to do to kind of minimize those effects. First of all, is a minimal level of one-to-one provision, so a minimal of entitlement to 3 sessions of at least half an hour with the same careers advisor throughout school or college, so that students have that opportunity to engage on a one-to-one level with someone who knows what they're talking about what they want to do and to figure out those steps of it. And secondly, is because Ucas is such a use source that all teachers that do know about it, students will know about it, many of them were very much encouraged to make Ucas applications. So to use Ucas as a resource and to plug in local apprenticeship options, ideally with partnering with local combined authorities, mayoral authorities. In Liverpool, there'd be more that the Liverpool City Regions Combined Authority does this, so it promotes all the apprenticeship options available locally, and for that to be plugged into Ucas, so that even if you are reliant on your teacher, and your teacher says, well, Ucas for information, and Ucas is great for the information, that they have that option to go to it, to look for it, and to help develop their ideas. And I know I'm over time, so let's stop there.
That's quite hard. Thanks, Neve. That's really helpful. And quite a nice bridge to our next guest on the panel, who is Claire Martians, Chief Executive of Ucas, who, as Neve was hinting at, I think are aware of some of the issues about or some of the interest in vocational options and about the kind of historic association with higher education. And I'd be interested to kind of hear about how Ucas is viewing the world and how you're going to trying to take these things forward.
Sure, and great to see you all at packed house. I think the Ucas of like 10 years ago is definitely changing in terms of what we as an independent charity really want to offer our students, be they mature students or a lot of them are 18-year-olds, a lot of them are international students as well. But if I just focus on those 18-year-olds for a moment as they're coming through, 3 things we know which really concord very much with your own research, which have led us to really changing what we offer those students. The first thing is we know that students do start thinking about, I think you said it was social patterning. I'm not a researcher, so obviously, the perception of, is university, is higher education a thing for me or not? A third of those are starting as early as year 6 in primary school. So, and we know at that age, if you're from a more disadvantaged background, you're starting to rule it in or out, depending on those influences around you. And they are largely parents and guardians, but also teachers and the neighbourhood within which you grow up. So it starts really, really early. We know that by the time students, and I know my own son is in year 10, but he chose his GCSEs back in year 8. So 13, 14 years old, and 50% of our schools do that. So, back at 13 years old, they will be making decisions that then either keep open or narrow down those choices, BTECs, and then higher education courses as well. So it starts really, really early. So what does Ucas need to do? It needs to start really, really early, rather than what is traditionally in that sort of year 12, 17 years old space. The second thing is, you're absolutely right in terms of the research, and I visit pretty much a school every week, and I can tell you that you have kids that go into do the Ucas form, and then there's another classroom, and what happens in that other classroom, I don't think is of quality in terms of really exploring options as in the classroom that's looking at the Ucas options. So the breadth of options, whether that is going into higher education, a traditional 3 undergraduate degree, or it's going into a degree or higher apprenticeship, or it's going into the world of work, needs to have parity. The breadth of options need to be in one place. So I fully support the recommendation there. We have around 1.5 million students from all walks of life that come through us each year. Out of around the over 500,000 that are from the UK 18-year-olds, over half of them are saying they're really interested in degree and higher apprenticeships, but they don't know how to navigate it, and it's not readily available for their teachers and advisors to do. And the third thing we absolutely know from speaking to students is that any information advice, guidance, careers advice, whatever we call it, has to be engaging and sustained. It can't be one-off, it can't be the half hour and then move on. It needs to be delivered very often by young voices, so hero voices, peer-to-peer voices, and it needs to be multi-channel. So it can't just be face-to-face, it also needs to be through what they're viewing on social media, be it Insta or other channels. So it needs to be early, it needs to be broad, and it needs to be really engaging. For me, there's never been a better time, really, to be thinking about careers advice. Firstly, I passionately believe, as Chief Executive Ucas, that education is fundamental to productivity. So if you think about all the issues that are going on in the conference over the couple of days, if you think about the cost of living, etc., education is where it starts, and parity and freedom of choice in that education. But also, we know we've done a huge amount of research, we've got a session on it tomorrow morning, around what we call Journey to a Million. So at the moment, you have around 700,000 applicants to higher education a year, just over 700,000. By 2026, which is not very long away, that will increase to 1 million. So what happens in a world where there's 1 million applicants? It's more competitive. What happens in a more competitive world is that people are likely to be left behind. So that early IAG, that early information advice and guidance, the parity becomes more and more important. Otherwise, I really feel that widening access and participation to all choices will become a sort of accidental victim of this increase in demographics and demand as we go through. Our role at Ucas, as I say, is both to those students to make sure that they have a personalised place, as you were saying, around where they can access everything. I've said openly before, our end goal is that you apply for an apprenticeship alongside a traditional 3 undergraduate degree. And you have that choice as you go into a lifelong learning environment. But another key part of our role, absolute key part of our role, is to help teachers and advisors. The number I speak to, who actually it's about being able to embed it in a lesson plan. So working with careers advisors to make it interesting, to make it accessible. So those are our key roles. If I look outside of Ucas, and one of the things I'd really like to see is a real strengthening and digitisation of that Baker clause to really, really help. And of course, funding to follow that as well. So I think it's an exciting time. I think there's no better time to be focusing on this really, really critical issue, because if we don't focus on it now, by 2030, because of course the demographics increase all the way to 2030 of 18-year-olds, we will be leaving generations of students behind.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Claire. That was a really helpful contribution. So I'd like to welcome our final speaker, who is Toby Perkins, MP for Chesterfield and Shadow Minister for Skills and Further Education, who hopefully has been taking in the conversation with interest, has been here listening to our proposal suggestions, and would be really interested to hear what your perspective and what Labour's perspective is.
Yeah, well, thanks very much, and thanks to Social Market Foundation for this research. It is a really important piece of work, and it is an area that, from the Labour Party's perspective, we have a huge amount of interest in. We think it's an area that, over the course of the last 12 years, has been criminally underinvested in, and has not been nearly taken seriously enough. And I think that one of the things you sort of so often hear in politics is people recounting their own experiences, which almost always seem to be negative about careers guidance, and the idea of a teacher coming in and a careers advisor coming in and saying, you know, you're going to end up working down the pit, and that was it. That was all the careers advice that we got. Actually, you know, I think that looking back to my own experience, 34 or so years ago, of being getting careers guidance, you know, the meeting that I had was broadly a positive one in terms of the options that I thought might be open to me at that time. It didn't, in the end, it wasn't in the end the route that I followed, but in terms of the sort of experience of careers guidance, I thought it was valuable. But it is absolutely, in terms of the question, if you like, the exam question about careers guidance, tackling inequality, it is so important to recognise. As Neve was saying, there is in terms of inequality, there is unequal quality of service, and it is those children in more deprived communities who need this the most. You know, children who are in much more connected circles are much less likely to think that they haven't got many options. And it is those who need their horizons opening, who need to have a variety of choices, that need to be able to think about some of the financial choices that they're going to make, as well as what they want to do, that most will benefit from having had access to good careers guidance. And I think, you know, one of the very first acts of the coalition Conservative Liberal Democrat government in 2010 was to abolish connections and to really, you know, at that moment say, well, careers guidance is going to be something that happens online. And I think that they realised what a catastrophic mistake that was. And I think, you know, since 2015 we have seen some improvement. I think that I would again agree with Neve that there's real inconsistency in terms of provision, and it's hardly surprising because in terms of government, it is very much left open to schools to really decide what the provision is. There is the statutory Baker clause, which we managed to strengthen slightly during the passage of the skills bill, but no school ever fails an Ofsted because their careers guidance is inadequate, and very few schools really feel that it is a priority of government. Now, it is absolutely a priority of the Labour Party. We believe both careers guidance and work experience are incredibly important in terms of levelling up and addressing generational inequality. And you know, I'm really pleased that Keir Starmer used his very first conference speech to make announcements on careers guidance and work experience. I think it shows that it is something that is of real importance to us. But Richard referred to the burdens on teachers, and I think that, you know, from my perspective, careers guidance is a profession in itself, and the idea that this is simply something that teachers kind of do in their spare time is hugely misguided. I think we need to recognise careers guidance should be firstly recognised as a profession it is, and secondly should be independent of the schools, because, you know, the reality is that schools do have skin in the game, and often schools, you know, have a real sort of imperative to stop their own sixth form because of the financial implications of making sure they get kids into the sixth form. So careers guidance tends to be for the kids who aren't going to make the sixth form, which, you know, is absolutely the wrong approach. And in terms of vocational education, we should be offering vocational routes to A-grade students as well as those who might not be able to go to university. So I think it's incredibly important we take it outside of the school in terms of those careers guidance meetings, and in terms of making sure that you know, in schools the number one priority is what is in the best interest of the child rather than what's in the best interest of the school. It seems entirely wrong to me that doesn't happen. But I really think Claire's point about embedding it within a lesson plan, and that, you know, careers guidance shouldn't just be something that happens in isolation in a particular hour of their lives, where right now is going to be the minute where we talk about your careers. but actually, thinking within the lesson plan about the interactions and about the future is something that I totally agree with. Richard also referred to the bias towards universities, and of course, we know that schools are judged based on the number of their students who go on to university, and it is my view that we should be also publishing and celebrating those schools who have large numbers going on to apprenticeships, who have students pursuing vocational routes, and that should be also equally seen as a real measure of the success of that school. And I think if government celebrated the number of schools who are amongst the highest numbers in terms of apprenticeships, you might see schools sort of operating in a somewhat different way. So I think from our perspective, we think there needs to be a careers guidance, work experience, should be a universal right. It shouldn't be there as something for schools to decide whether or not they want to do. It should be something that every child is able to expect and able to rely upon. It should be absolutely something that there is a uniform level of quality that is expected. I'm kind of open-minded on whether that should be something for schools to continue to choose how they deliver it, or whether some kind of independent careers service is actually a better way to go. But what isn't open to negotiation is the quality of those interventions and the independence of them. That giving children the widest possible options, and also ensuring that everyone has access to careers guidance and everyone has work experience, that the work experience intervention is of a high quality, that it isn't just the Milton's son spending a morning a week getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning to help his dad deliver milk, and the politician's son spending a week in Westminster, but actually do things that your parents haven't already done. So I think that having that work experience and schools being judged on the quality of the work experience, and careers guidance being judged on the quality of the interactions they have with employers, and the extent to which employers feel welcomed into a school is of tremendous importance.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So we have Toby, I think, for another 15 or 20 minutes, and obviously the rest of the panel with all the insights that they have to bring to share. I'd now like to open it up to questions, see if anyone has any thoughts or comments. Yes, yourself there.
Yeah, hi, Rebecca from Icon Voice. And one of the things that we do is try to support young people who want to pursue careers linked to the policy-making process, particularly those from underrepresented backgrounds. And that strand of what we do is kind of risen organically. So we support careers talks, work experience, and we have a mentoring programme. And because it's risen due to demand, I haven't really put much thought into it, and I'd really love to know if there's evidence out there about which interventions are most impactful, because at the moment I'm just responding to demand rather than being targeted. If there's a way to be more targeted based on what's more impactful, that would be great. And question to the panel, but maybe there might be other people in the room. We've spoken to the National Careers Service a couple of times about updating their description of jobs in the policy-making world, because they don't match the jobs that are available, and we've hit a bit of a wall. So I don't know if anyone can help with that in terms of just the careers that are on there, being aligned with what jobs are actually available.
Fantastic. Thanks very much. I'll take a couple more.
I'm really pleased to be able to come to this, because this is a subject that's really close to my heart. I've been a careers advisor for nearly 30 years, and I've been really heartened by some of the things that I've heard, especially from you, Toby, about the essence of what careers advice is and how it should be delivered. But before I elaborate on that a bit, I just want to deliver a gentle reprimand. This is a session on careers advice and guidance, and there's no careers advisor on your panel, and I think I'm not volunteering my services in the future. I hasten to add, but if you're doing it again, it would actually be nice to have somebody from the profession on there. Secondly, I currently work in the HE sector at a university in the North East, and you probably won't be surprised to hear this. I see a lot of students, especially in their final year, who've not had any what I would call proper professional independent careers advice from school, and have selected options from what they know about. which might be an A-level subject. We're all limited by the knowledge we have. And if you don't have that wide-ranging independent careers advice when you're in sixth form, you're maybe going to pick business studies. I'm not picking on business studies in particular, but it's just an obvious one that students think they're going to get a job directly from, and it doesn't work like that. And I'm just very concerned, particularly about students from working class backgrounds who maybe have self-limiting beliefs that make them choose things that are not necessarily the right thing for them. I worked for 6 years for Aim Higher on aspiration raising projects. So the three things that I would sort of really like, and it follows on from what Toby says, is that there should be a national career service for young people in schools, independent of schools. Because with the best will in the world, and I've worked with some great schools, there's pressure to fill sixth form places and other statistical targets. So I think it needs to be independent. The people who deliver these 3 sessions of careers advice, and that's great. When I worked in the local authority career service, there was only a guarantee of 1, but at least everybody got something. They should be properly and independently sort of trained. And I would really like to see bringing back a version of the Aim Higher service, which was actually a partnership between university schools, colleges, and youth services to properly support young people, particularly from disadvantaged backgrounds. And I know in County Durham, where I come from, it had a real impact on participation rates from the most disadvantaged students. I could say loads more because I'm passionate about it, but that's it for the moment.
Thank you very much for your contribution. And yeah, I think it's a fair challenge to say that we obviously don't have anyone.
Sorry, I couldn't resist.
The only kind of mitigation I can offer is certainly that Neve and I, in doing the research, did very much speak to careers advice professionals. So the influence is there, albeit kind of somewhat diluted. It's having come through us. I'll take one more question and then I'll throw it open to the panel. Yes, yourself.
I'm Caitlin from Ucas, but I promise this isn't a plant and Claire's know what I'm about to ask. So
I'm a bit worried now.
It was a bit on the sort of discussion we were having around apprenticeships in particular and the careers advice to support people into that profession. You know, as I mentioned, we've got huge numbers. More than half of the people who register for a Ucas account say they're interested in doing an apprenticeship. But I think less than 5% of higher degree apprenticeship starts actually go to 18-year-olds because in lots of cases, there's a strong incentive for employers to upskill current staff rather than actually bring someone kind of brand new into the labour market. So given we know all this demand is there, what actually could we be doing to help support, including through careers guidance, young people actually to take opportunities that are there, but perhaps are sort of being directed more at kind of existing employees? And you know, how can we start matching some of the demand for apprenticeships on that side of things?
Great. Really great questions. Thank you so much. Toby, do you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, the first contribution wasn't really a question. It was really interesting to kind of hear your experience. I mean, particularly, you wanted me to respond to on that, but I was, very interested to kind of hear what you were saying.
Yeah, so just evidence on which interventions are those.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Well, sorry, you're right. It was a question. I mean, I think from my own experience, and what we've been hearing is that in terms of work experience, what's really important is the work that's done in advance of it and the work that's done after it. So it's about making sure that there's a relevance to what the person's going to be doing, that the work experience placement that they go on is kind of prepared for them to be there and has given some thought to what they're going to do, and that it's followed up afterwards, so that there's actually an opportunity to sort of learn from what they've done. I think if you actually compare that with what is often like, kids get at some point in year 10, year 12 again, get a form saying, take this home to your mum and tell us where you're going to be. The school try and reassure themselves the child isn't going to die while they're there. And with that exception, that's it. They disappear from school for a week. The teachers go into their lesson plans or whatever else, and there's no follow up to it whatsoever. So I think, the quality in advance and after, as well as making sure there's a relevance there is what I would say. So glad you reminded me of a question. It turns out I have quite a good answer. In terms of the point you made, first, I was interested to hear you were at Durham, because I think this young lady from Chesterfield, Charlotte Crossley, who was involved with the work, was at Durham and was doing.
Not Durham University.
Oh, was it not? Oh, right.
Durham.
Oh, sorry. I thought you might have known Charlotte. But, no, so I mean, I hear what you say about the National Careers Service. As I say, I mean, I absolutely share the view that it has to be independent. I'd be interested in your and others' feedback on the Careers Enterprise Company, because they're doing a substantial amount of work. This government think that that they're a way to go, but it is open to schools whether or not want to use them. And some people, when we've consulted on this, sort of say, well, look, actually some of those Careers Enterprise, the hubs are pretty good. There's no point ripping it up and starting again. And there's others that say it's very inconsistent. So I'd be interested in your perspective on that. But I think in terms of it being independent, certainly that is something I entirely agree with. And I think in terms of the final question about supporting young people to take those advantages, I think it is about making sure that they are aware of those opportunities. I think it's just such a sort of a kind of a tide of expectation that what for many young people they do is go to school, do their A-levels, and then go to university, and sort of the only choice is where they're going to study and what they're going to study. And so I think it is about publicising the benefit of apprenticeships, and also making sure that people are aware of those opportunities.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Toby. Claire, I'd be interested to know your thoughts.
Sure. I'll take them all as one.
Sure.
I'm going to I'll meander for a little bit and hopefully answer all three. So I think because the first two questions, I think there's a little bit of a crossover really, because I think there's two things for me, not necessarily interventions. I can't see the lady because Caitlin's sort of hiding it, but there we are. Not necessarily evidence on interventions, but what we've done a lot of work on is what you call transition. So transition from secondary to higher education and what makes successful transition. And a lot of it is about starting early, but also we've done quite a lot of work on cohorts of students. So if I'm an LGBTQ plus student, what is it for me that makes that? If I'm a disabled student, what is it for me? Or one with care experience? And they're very different. There's some common threads, but there's some very different understandings of if a university is connecting with that individual, what makes this transition successful. So they're all available, so you can go and look at those reports, and there's some really good evidence there. The second thing, which I think crosses into your question, and I do feel really embarrassed now. I like to say my mother was a careers advisor, my dad was a teacher, so I feel I'm imbued with it like a stick of rock. But I think one of the things we're working on is particularly disadvantaged students, identifying that they are disadvantaged or that they have certain characteristics. So we've introduced a whole new set of questions in Ucas about whether you're an estranged student or whether you're from a forces family or you have care experience. And this is the first time this year. And disclosing that and the fact that it's to your advantage to disclose it. But then how do I connect with the summer schools or the things that universities do lay on that are for me there? And I think there is more to be done to do that connection, because I think it's very difficult if you're a teacher or careers advisor to know what's out there and who are the students you connect. So that's a role for Ucas that could help with that connection.
That's what AIM used to do.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a gap there at the moment, doing that connection. I think the other thing is about independent careers advice, which Toby I think has probably covered in terms of the independence, and I absolutely agree in terms of the independent. We can't kid ourselves that 17, 18-year-olds want everything face-to-face. One of the things we found in the pandemic was actually when we did a lot of things online, they want a blend. They absolutely came back to our events in droves in terms of the face-to-face. They love the face-to-face, but they want the online, the multi-channel, the through social media, the on the web, as well as the face-to-face. So they want the choice, exactly. And that blend is really, really important. I wasn't going to answer Caitlin's question because that was a cheat, but I do think on the supply side of things, there's massive demand there, and we can help stimulate that demand. We have to help SMEs, because 95% of businesses in the UK are SMEs. How do we get them to take apprenticeships and help them through it? Because we've got a huge amount of national corporations who are doing this, but it's the small and medium enterprises we've got to help in terms of the supply of apprenticeships, which wasn't your question. I'm still looking at you, it was Caitlin's.
We work with SMEs at the university and try and get people internships.
Yeah.
Because it's the same issue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Lee, it'd be interesting to get your thoughts on the questions asked, but also a couple of these institutions that have emerged. And I apologise for people who are not as immersed in this about the institutional structure. But we've had a mention of National Career Service, which is not primarily aimed at young people in schools at the moment, but there's some satisfaction around that. Toby brought up the Careers and Enterprise Company, which exists essentially to identify good careers practice and encourage schools to work together and collaborate and identify kind of what works for careers services. So do you have thoughts on those institutions and how they work?
Well, I suppose in the Careers and Enterprise Company, from our, I suppose, experience of it through the research was generally quite positive based on the careers coordinators who we spoke to and their ability to develop that that network within across their school. But even with that, it really did depend on school and college management and whether they were actually committed in giving the time and funding for that careers counsellor or careers coordinator to form those connections. I think that can often be quite a sort of barrier, because if you don't have a supportive management system, it's very difficult for you to engage and develop outwards. And I think on the National Career Service, most of the, I suppose we spoke to a range of them. So we spoke to students in school and college, like in their final year, those who are in their first year of university or apprenticeship. But we also spoke to quite a few adult learners who are the targets more so of the National Career Service. And only one of them had used it. The rest hadn't heard of it. And it wasn't really something that they really felt they could engage with. It wasn't something they were aware of when it was brought up. It was like, experiences were good, and I think any of the research that the NCS have done has shown it's been quite good, but it isn't, I think, as accessible as it could be, especially as opposed to adult learners who want maybe to go back in to the world of that. And if I may just address, I suppose, Rebecca's question on maybe the interventions that might be most valued. We don't, I think it's fair to say, have necessarily hard evidence on it, but based on the discussions that we had, unfortunately, in some ways, it really depends. So something like Careers Talks was really valued, I think, by people in the sort of discovery phase, trying to figure out what they're interested in, where they wanted to go. And the work experience is also valued there too, but as Toby was saying, it really needs to be structured. It needs to be something they can reflect on and find out actually what skills they took from it, what their role in it was. And I know I was at an event for Speakers for Schools last week, and they have some work coming out in a few months that does have like a tangible show of how work experience can improve life outcomes, learning outcomes and stuff, which would be quite a bit more hard evidence for what works in a work experience context.
Richard,
I probably should be the person who shouldn't be on the panel and should be replaced by a career advisor, but I did to the fact that we funded it. That's why I'm here. It is something that's incredibly important, and I would just only add around apprenticeships. I run a business. It is really complicated to work out as a business how you use the apprenticeship levy, how you create and go about engaging with a school or a university or any other body to create a degree apprenticeship. So my plea would be, and I would be a huge supporter, because there is a war for talent going on in business like I've never seen in over 30 years of business. And if I had routes that were easy and straightforward to develop talent using the apprenticeship levy that we already pay, and frankly, as a business, we have our own learning academy within Unite, and we want to make that available to all of our partners, universities. But if we could find a way to create the degree apprenticeships to use the levy more effectively to create those opportunities, then I would be all for it.
Thank you. Right, let's take a couple more questions and then go back to the panel. Yes, you sir there.
I'm not down to Transport Street Games. We focus on children and people in the house of poverty and desperation, whichever term you want, depending on government in charge and things are being under service and youth term at the moment. In the youth song, there was an event this morning about reimagining education and youth services, and what's the panel view around how we take a more holistic approach? Because the worry is if you go forward, you end up with what we've got now, which is where departments are not talking to each other. And how you can look at a more holistic approach rather than just necessarily create advice, but create experience. There's been research done by around out of school provision in areas of deprivation. Our own research, 50% of the sites have access to high quality youth provision, uniform groups, out of school provision, after school clubs. All of that builds up your wider experience. If you're then going to go for job, as I said, in a competitive market, you might get great careers advice, but if you've not got all those other experiences, I think we need to take a more holistic approach to this, that it is the advice you get, but it's for a job for lots of the services and advice. Because in the last 10 years, there has been services who have stepped in to do that support for young people. So young people go where they feel comfortable. It's not necessarily you have to. There's young people who don't like school and won't go to career advice, but got great careers advice from the organisation they've been working. They've seen a role model who says you can do what I can do. And I think we need to take how do we take a more holistic view of this? Because that's, I think, the only way that this will work for a broader set of young people. Because if there's not much in the community for those young people to access, the advice would be great, but then you're still hitting a gap around where do you go next in terms of that career opportunity, because those services and other things are just not there in the local areas they are compared to more affluent parts of the country.
Great question. Thank you very much. Someone else? Yes, yourself in first.
Hi. I wanted to pick up, Toby, on what you said about work experience needing to be a universal right, and giving that diversity of experience that's more than just what your parents did. What do we need to give kind of every young person across the country exposure to that diversity of experience where there might be limited businesses where they live? So kind of balancing that need to give people experience that are relevant to their local economy and exposing them to the breadth of what exists elsewhere.
Yeah, well, it's a good question. So yeah, I'm afraid I'm going to have to answer these and then love you and leave. But thanks again for putting this on. It's been really great. I mean, just to sort of start with the second question, I think that it's all about the sort of firstly the amount of time that gets spent on it, but secondly the partnerships that schools and careers advisors have. I think work experience and careers guidance really should go hand in hand. And I think if you've got dedicated independent careers guidance, if careers guidance wasn't just something that was an add-on to the deputy head teacher's job, but was actually seen as something that's really important, then those partnerships would be being built. And of course, you're right that in some areas there's going to be more plentiful opportunities to do work experience than others. But I think that in terms of most areas, almost every area in the country, if you have a connected school, then you'll be able to gain access to those sort of opportunities. But it's a valid question. In terms of the first thing about a more holistic approach, and one of the things I always think of in government is that the only thing for certain is that whatever you're not doing now, you will end up doing the thing that you used to do at some point in the past. And we had originally careers guidance. There was a thought that it wasn't holistic enough, so Connections was created. It was meant to be much more holistic. And then ultimately, we've had all of the things I've already referred to in terms of the government. I think we just need to be really, really careful that what we don't do is actually water down the careers guidance. I think that's actually what happened with Connection from them. I wasn't so much involved in politics at that time, but in terms of the feedback I've had, that it did try to be more holistic, but it kind of fell between two chairs and didn't actually do a great job in terms of the careers guidance. So I don't think that it's in any way our proposal that we reinvent Connections. I think it was disastrous to get rid of it and replace it with nothing, but I don't think it was necessarily perfect. So on that, I will, afraid, have to get on. But thanks very much for hosting.
Thank you so much for joining us. Does anyone else want to come in on those, or shall I take a couple more questions? Yeah, should we get a couple more questions then? Yes, bring it back.
University. It's sort of related to what the lady in the front said, but sort of the other way around. I 100% agree work experience is really, really important. but we've got schools, colleges, universities all fighting for the same businesses. And then the small businesses who want to give the work experience don't have the capacity to do it, especially at the moment. So how do we get over that? Especially the T-levels coming in, suddenly you've got all these schools needing the same amount of hours as the universities need. And it's getting to the stage that businesses are having to choose who they're going to work with and knocking people out. So it's great saying have a link with a business, but it's getting to such a extent it's actually affecting the businesses because they're having to turn into schools themselves. How do we address that problem? That it's not just certain universities, schools who are getting those links with the big businesses, and other universities and schools having to either not get the work experience or in places that aren't relevant. How do we get over that?
Great. Any other questions?
Yeah, there's been, Helena from Ucas. There's been like a few mentions of parents and kind of talking about the early years. And I guess careers education and advice guidance is happening at home in the community. We might not look like what we call it at school, but parents, role models in the community, family members, friends, all have an influence on a young person's kind of pathway. And how much do you think we need to balance kind of this advice notes we give directly to students, we're kind of engaging that broader community and then kind of advising them on what pathways are available and how they can work with the young people to kind of get them on the pathway that's right and the one they will go to.
Brilliant. And yes, you had a question.
Manish Mardi, Camden Councillor. I'm also the Cabinet Advisor on diversity. And I'm actually working on a project on how to get more on social inequalities within schools. So I've been going into schools, talking to the young people, but trying to get into the school even as a counsellor has been quite hard. It's almost like the schools don't see a benefit of the research I'm trying to do, the input I'm trying to do. But whilst I'm there, what the students are saying is they almost, someone mentioned limited belief. They have a very limited belief over what they could do. Like I love saying I'm a counsellor, and I came here, as an immigrant. I'm not first generation, I'm an immigrant. So it kind of blows their way, especially when we're talking about racial inequality, so the young, black, brown children. So my question is, how do we convince the school that the work that we're trying to do is important? And also, how do we get into the minds of young people? Like if I had my way, I'd be going into every single school and be like, hi, I'm Nanush, I'm a counsellor, I run a business, I'm also black, I'm an immigrant. But how do we do it? How do we build that relationship so they know, just because my environment is this, just because I tick all the boxes of inequality doesn't mean I have to follow this certain path. You could, excel a different way.
Great, really helpful. So, Claire, a few questions there. Kind of from different perspectives, looking at the relationship between schools and businesses and getting that, and people who speak to them, and also on parents' role models in the wider community.
They're three very different questions. So I'll just quickly, on the one around work experience and I suppose making it simpler for smaller employers. So I think that was the lady at the back. Sorry, I forgot your name. I couldn't hear it actually because the doors were going up and down. So Sophie, I think it's the same thing as apprenticeships actually, and I really think that the key to the whole lack of supply is getting small employers having anchor employers. The anchor employers and simplifying it. So simplifying it and having the anchor employer do the hard work for you. So we've got to make it simple for organisations like Richards so that they can then operate on behalf of X number of smaller, accommodation providers, and they're running it. So I think that's absolutely the key to it. And it's the same for apprenticeships as it was work experience. But I know you were talking about work experience. On the second, actually, I'm going to go to your question next. So I thought I worked in a county council for 8 years, and so it's very, very familiar to me getting into schools and the difficulties of getting into schools. And there's lots of reasons why. A lot of it is time. I think there's also something. I used to work very closely with our local enterprise partnership on language. And so understanding an academic and school language versus a business language, we used to have lots of, I felt like I was translating sometimes between two very, very different languages. But I also think there's something about resource, but also are schools measured on having people to come into the school and inspire them. So it's not just about measurement, but the amount of schools, that I speak to, that it's the number of, young people that went to, not even a university, but a certain type of university, that's what they feel they are measured on. And so I think there's something about actually measuring on, did you have inspiring, enriching careers, information, advice and guidance in person talking to those people, I think would help. But it's not just about measurement because we end up sort of measuring the wrong things otherwise. And then there was something about the broader community, I think, you mentioned about parents. And look, I've got a 14-year-old and I've had 2 other boys go through my house as stepsons. And I can tell you, I think the parents is important, but it's not everything, and it certainly isn't everything for most of the week. It is about those heroes, those peer-to-peer, and getting people in the community, whether it's a football coach or the boxing club or whatever, talking about where they came from, what they did, and those are the people that Ucas are working with to bring in, even on results days when we're at our peak. We're not using, the typical sort of parent or teacher or even careers advice. We use some of those, but we use people who've come from different walks of life and come through different routes and have ended up doing brilliant things. And that's what's inspiring for young people. So I think parents is some of the key. I'd like to see it was more of the key as a parent, but I think it's broader than parents and us bringing out those people onto digital platforms so everyone has access.
So I suppose on what Sophie's point about that fighting for access to those businesses and stuff, it's not something I suppose that we particularly looked into, but I'll refer to Speakers for Schools again, because that is their whole thing, is building that connection and making it easier to find places for students. And one of the biggest problems I think, especially for smaller businesses, smaller schools, is all of I suppose the paperwork that goes with it, the safeguarding, making a plan for everything to go out. And from my understanding of what Speakers for Schools do, they help to coordinate that. And part of the thing is to bring small businesses in so that people have that. But I also think that there has maybe more of a switch of focus from, rather than I want to do work experience at big name company, it's I want to do work experience at this particular kind of a role, which opens up a lot more flexibility of I'll look for that sort of a role, not for that specific place, if that makes sense. And then I suppose I've got kind of a mix on Anita's and Helena's points of anecdotal information we found in our research was what was extraordinarily valued, be it from parents, be it from someone with a similar background to them, having that story, that peer-to-peer, that person-to-person story of this is what I did, not sort of this is what I did, you can do it too, but just seeing that not just because you can relate to that person, but also because to a lot of the students and adults we spoke to, it was generally viewed as a lot more truthful, a lot more well, you have no interest in lying to me. You're not trying to buy me into your friendship, buy me into your university. You're looking for nothing from me. So that anecdotal information and harnessing that, I think, is quite important. And I think the balance of it is also quite important, because you can't entirely rely on anecdotal information, because some people have really horrible experiences, some people have really great experiences, and just because someone has one doesn't mean you will also have it. So I think balancing it is a fine line. How to do that, not entirely sure.
Richard?
I was struck by what Claire said earlier around sort of general provision of careers advice and information of being offering it early, being a broad content, but really making it engaging. And it's that sort of engaging bit where we must have the ability in this day and age to bring technology to bear. Yes, I understand the value of face-to-face sort of work experience, face-to-face career support, but through online content, through mentoring, through a world of social media, which I'm definitely out of my pay grade now talking about social media, but influencers and showing what is out there, what is the possibilities for young people. And then for businesses, it is about making it easier, making it impactful. Businesses do want to measure the impact they have when they bring in an intern or when they support a graduate program. All businesses now, we're very focused on the S of ESG, environmental, social and governance. We're a business that's got a strong social purpose. We have had for many, many years, so it's not new to us. But if we can find ways for businesses to be able to measure the impact they have in the educational setting, you will find businesses paying an awful lot of attention.
So we are just about running out of time. So I just want to thank the panelists, obviously, for speaking. Thank you so much for participating in the discussion. I'm going to go around the panelists and give you a kind of quick final couple of remarks, just kind of sum up and round out the discussion. So Claire, any closing thoughts from yourself?
I mean, obviously, government has a huge role to play here, but I think there is so much more than government. I think it goes back to some of your thoughts around community. And as an organisation that's, operating across the UK, I think so many organisations, the lady from I Have a Voice at the Backbusher, all of those sorts of organisations, big or small, have a role to do the best by young people, to make it engaging, to make it broad, have parity, and to be early. Because I think, honestly, at age 17, we've sort of lost it. We have to start back at early secondary.
Any closing comments from yourself?
Yeah, I suppose it's something that didn't really get onto, but I think something that we need to remember is that careers, information, advice, and guidance is very much spoken in the context of school and secondary school and of a often 12 to 16, 12 to 18. But it does go beyond that. And generally ideally what you learn in an ideal environment about it in your secondary school, college situation, you can apply as an adult. But adults need career guidance too. And we don't talk about that a huge amount. I mean, we say, oh, well, there's the NCS, but it's not as involved as it should be. And we've got increasing numbers of adult career changes, people perhaps taking early retirement. They might appreciate some careers guidance as to what to do next. Maybe they want early retirement. Maybe they're just a bit sick and they just want to retire, so they're not in a job they hate anymore. And careers guidance, I think, could really help with that. So I think we also need to not forget that there is also a large section of the population that tends to be forgotten when we talk about it. And we shouldn't.
Great. And Richard very kindly kicked us off. Would you like to round us out with some closing remarks?
Only to say thank you very much for everybody who's contributed. I think to Toby and to Claire, and obviously to the SMF as well. This is a subject that we will, as a United Student, remain interested in. Clearly, it is a real challenge, for the whole of the UK. So it needs a partnership between government and business, through third sector organisations. The gentleman at the back, summed it up very well. I think we need to ensure that we are reimagining how we provide careers advice guidance to young people and to people who are looking to reskill. The country needs the right sets of skills. This is one route to potentially provide that, but it does need some big ideas and some big thinking. Thank you.
Thanks everyone. Thanks for joining us, and thanks to the panel.